welcome. This is a Just Center webinar. Where should we put our energy transition? Taking a new place-based and place-specific approach to reaching net zero. I'm Sherilyn McGregor. I'm the director of the Just Center based at the University of Manchester, and I'm joined this morning by Emily Morrison, who's the impact lead for the Just Center and the Just Transition director at the Young Foundation, and Anne Owen, who's an associate professor at the University of Leeds, and we are going to be sharing with you our work on a tool. We're thinking about readiness for net zero. I'll just quickly go over the agenda before handing over. We're going to start off, I'm going to turn over to Emily in a minute to give a brief introduction to the Just Center, and then to talk a little bit about what we mean by place readiness as a concept. And then Anne will talk about why we need such a tool, and then give you a first look at this tool that she and her team at Leeds and others in the Just Center and Young Foundation are working on. So what can it do, and what impact do we anticipate that it can have? And then give you a sense of what we plan to do next with our development of the tool over the next couple of years. And then we will have time, perhaps shorter time since we were late in starting, but some time for some question and answer. And our colleague from the Young Foundation, Samantha Themenimule, is going to be monitoring the Q&A. So please add any questions that you might like or some comments, how you think it would be useful to you in your work, perhaps, in the Q&A function. Right, I will turn over now to Emily Morrison.
Thank you, Sherilyn, and welcome everyone this morning. Thank you so much for joining us. So just a quick introduction firstly to the Just Center. So the Center stands for Joined Up Sustainability Transformation, but it also, as you can see neatly, talks about the central concept which we are working towards, which is a just transition. That is a just transition for all places, all communities, for society as a whole within the UK, and it's an £8 million investment by ESRC over 5 years, but with a specific empirical focus on the north of England, which in itself is very innovative. We're looking at how the north, which has its own distinct intersections of social, environmental and economic challenges when it comes to achieving a just transition, how can that become a microcosm by which we can learn what is relevant to other communities, other places in the UK, but also internationally. But our work over the course of the whole centre will go broader than the North, but we're starting and really making the most of the North almost as, you know, a crucible, as an incubus where we can work in collaboration to research how a just transition can happen. As part of our commitment to impact, we are co-creating tools for communities, business and policymakers across the UK. So we're really keen to test one of these tools, our base central tool, which is a developing index of readiness for a just transition with you today. So if I could just go to the next slide, please. So what is place-based readiness for net zero? So we know already, and it's been very well researched, that net zero policy will reach into most areas of everyday life, and we have humanized those. So rather than talking about, say, transport or talking about specific challenges around electric vehicles, for example, we're calling it simply where we live, where we go, what we eat, what we do for fun, where we work and what we buy. So taking a person-centered view of transition is absolutely core to the way that we're approaching the Just Centre. And we're doing that because essentially we want this centre to speak with people about their journey through a just transition, not to people from the perspective of just academics and policymakers or those with the wherewithal to make transition happen. We know that the ability to engage with what is probably the biggest societal shift that we've faced since the internet, a just transition probably is the biggest change to reach net zero. This is shaped by social and spatial factors. And so readiness is our term for the combination of social and spatial factors that will shape whether a person, a household or a whole community is able to act to change from, say, high carbon ways of living and ways of life, ways of working, ways of commuting, ways of traveling, ways of having fun, to a low carbon, more sustainable way of life. So readiness, it's not a static concept. It's not just a moment in time. It's a dynamic concept, and it will change over the course of what is likely to be several decades long process of transition if we're successful in achieving it. We are conceptualizing readiness as having the capability, and that's very crucial because, again, it's about agency, it's about access, and it's about removing structural barriers to participate in low carbon living. And this is about how do we reach transition, crucially, also without exacerbating any inequalities that already exist. And a lot of people have said that's not possible, but we are determined to show how it could be possible and how those trade-offs between, say, maintaining a really good quality of life or improving people's quality of life and reaching a low carbon way of life can be put together. So we use an approach which Anne will go into in much greater detail than me, that's derived from the Bristol Social Exclusion Matrix to characterize this. If I can move to the next slide, please. So just transitions and social inclusion. So we can see here that where we live, these are the different domains, for example, and we've got underneath them what kind of factors might be under the surface of each of those domains. And some of those are broken down into existing inequalities and then the potential inequalities that might exacerbate or increase under net zero if we are not monitoring and finding ways to improve the readiness that different groups, particularly vulnerable groups, have to some of these existing inequalities. I'm not going to go into the whole table as a whole, but it just starts to give you a flavour of how we bring social inclusion as a lens into an environmental transition. So, for example, looking at the affordability of electric private transport and the current inaccessibility for a lot of different places of public transport. So they might have, for example, several buses to do one journey that someone can currently do in a car, or it's too expensive, or it's just not accessible to wheelchair users or people with limited mobility, for example. Those are all inequalities that already exist, but they will be exacerbated if we're not careful under a net zero lens, because, for example, if those people also then cannot transition to an electric vehicle, they're reliant on personal transport that's currently a polluting car, how are they going to participate in the transition? So that's just to give you one worked example there. If we can move to the next slide, please. So why do we need a readiness tool? So this has come directly from work that we've been doing, firstly at the Young Foundation since 2019, which is really looking at what was missing from the perspective of not just policymakers that we talk to every week at the Young Foundation, but also from the perspective of people trying to make this work within communities across the country. And when people look at a just transition, or even some people call it just reaching net zero, quite a lot of what holds them back from action is it seems too big. It's too many challenges happening at once, because it is, as we've said, a wholesale social and societal transition. But essentially what we're looking to do with the readiness tool is to help people to know where they could make greater impact. So where, for example, there are the most severe challenges for which households in which places across the UK, and then where, for example, there are places where you might be able to do a little bit more and achieve a greater acceleration towards a just transition. So the aim with the readiness tool, and I'm going to hand over to Anne to talk about a bit more about the development process there, is to really help people to know where to put their energy. We know that lots of policymakers have limited budgets. They also have limited capacity in a lot of local authorities across the country. There's often one net zero officer trying to juggle an entire low carbon strategy for a place or an area, or there's one person responsible for it in a small business trying to make that business sustainable. So we want to help people to know where to put their energy, hence the rather tricky pun which I'm going to own up to for the whole of this webinar. But I'll hand over to Anne Owen now, who's leading our development of the tool, to talk us through the technical aspects of how the tool's going to work. Thank you.
Okay, thanks ever so much, Emily. So could I just go back to that previous slide just a second? On this slide, you can see that we've got a three-stage user engagement process, and I'm going to present some of the results from our sort of market research as I talk through the next couple of slides. So we started with trying to understand whether a tool was needed, and to look at what was currently available and what people were currently using. We then moved on to presenting the tool, very much in a process a little bit like this, but with some sort of in-person events around the north, showing people our ideas and gathering feedback on them. And then the final stage, once we've got a working version of the tool, we'll be doing some user testing. And if you're interested in being involved with that, do let us know, and we'll try and get you involved in one of our testing events. Next slide, please. So first of all, who are our potential user groups? Our events were attended very, very well. I think we had over 100 people coming to them, and predominantly we had academics, charity groups, local governments, and a wide variety of people who gave their thoughts and feedback on the sorts of tools that they're using. Next slide, please. We found that users are currently using tools which display national and government data when they're trying to find tools that will help them understand the movement towards net zero. Local and regional data is also very popular, and some specialist sites and tools were also mentioned as well. And we've got a list of these, and there's not really too much of a pattern that varies between the type of users, but we do find that sort of the charity groups are tending to use more of the open source data, whereas the academics are maybe using something more specialized. Next slide, please. We asked people to give us some feedback on what they thought was missing from what's currently available. And a lot of it was basically just data. We want more data on a variety of things. So data on sociodemographics, data on skills, these sorts of things. People particularly mentioned that it was very difficult to find spatial data on attitudes and behaviour. These exist in sort of surveys, such as the Understanding Society survey, but people were really interested in seeing whether they could get this at a more place-based level. Next slide, please. Other things that people mentioned to us was the scale. A lot of data exists at the local authority or the regional level, but really getting good quality local data, so place-based at the neighbourhood level, was missing. Often data is out of date. There are a lot of concerns, particularly the sort of pace of change since COVID and the economic crisis. People want data that is now. People talked a lot about they struggled to try and combine data together. They could get a data set that existed on one spatial scale, and then they had other data that was maybe at postcode level. What they really would appreciate was being able to view these data layers together to really understand how people are experiencing life at the moment. Data is not easy to access, it's not inclusive. There's also some sort of mistrust around data sets, and people wanted to be able to understand what was going on in their area, and also to understand how other areas were experiencing the transition to net zero that they felt was similar to their own area. Next slide, please. Finally, people talked a lot about governance and control and challenges. They wanted to know how to determine which tool was best, and something about sort of theory. How is just transition going to work at the local level? So this gave us an awful lot of scope to think about, was there something that we could provide and do for people? Next slide, please. So we're proposing to build and develop a tool that will help users to understand where carbon impact is high and what are the factors that are causing this or driving this. We want users to be able to understand the current situation. So what are neighbourhoods like right now? What are the challenges they're facing? What inequalities exist? What's stopping them from being able to change? We also want people to think towards the future. So if we're thinking about net zero policy, could the tool be used to determine where current net zero policy might work. Also, what areas are being possibly left behind. Next slide, please. So we're developing a tool that will use open source data because this is trusted. We're going to use novel approaches to connect survey data, so that attitudinal data, to geographies based on demographic characteristics. And we're committed to providing detailed metadata on the data sources and any construction methods that was employed. This is something that was very important to people when we asked them about what they would want. The tool will display thematic neighbourhood data through maps. People are very keen on the idea of being able to see spatial patterns and to explore neighbourhoods. These maps will be interactive. People can click on them to find out about areas, and also explore the potential of layering things up. So sort of adding data layers together, perhaps to look at hotspots. We are committed to using the census lower layer super output area as the spatial unit. So we are constructing the data layers so that they all talk to that specific spatial unit, because this is something that is quite stable. It will exist hopefully until the next census, and they're specially designed that they create sort of homogeneous neighbourhood level type areas. Next slide, please. This diagram here tries to talk about our approach to how we did this. We didn't just want to collect spatial data sets from everywhere. We wanted some kind of sort of structure and a sort of a concept that we could hang this on, so that we could have a justification for what data sets we were including and what data sets we were not. So at the top there, you can see our domains of life. And for this example, I'm going to focus on the what we eat domain. So here we're thinking about food and nutrition. What we were aiming to do was to try and explore barriers, enablers, and potential inequalities relating to climate policy around food. And we identified from other colleagues in Leeds, you can classify net zero policy as one of 6 different things. The policies are either talking about digitisation, circular economy, energy efficiency, healthy society, environmental awareness, and work and automation. And what we wanted to do was to understand how a policy that fits under one of those 6 themes could bring about further inequalities, what were the barriers stopping people from engaging it, and what would the enablers be that meant that people could get on board with this. And we thought by taking this approach, which used policies across the top and then the barriers and enablers down the side, we wouldn't miss anything. And I just wanted to say that the barriers down the side are from the Bristol Social Exclusion Matrix. So we're kind of hanging this on an existing framework to ensure that we're not missing anything. And these are classified into access to resources, participation, and quality of life. Once we conceptualize these barriers, enablers, and inequalities as spatial data layers, then we have the challenge of actually operationalizing this. So could we find data that would help us explore these? Looking for data from places like the census, the indices of multiple deprivation, data that's produced by DESNES, and to start to build these data layers from surveys, such as the attitudinal data. Next slide, please. Just to give you a bit of an insight as to exactly how much has gone into this kind of policy assessment framework, we're continuing with our theme of food, but this time thinking about energy efficiency. A lot of the policies talked about centralising retail and distribution. So thinking more about people getting their food from home deliveries and not actually physically visiting the supermarket. We had some brainstorms about what this might mean. Who would be disadvantaged from not being able to visit supermarkets, perhaps, what are the barriers to being able to participate in this type of future? Can everybody use online delivery stores? What happens if people don't have that central meeting point as a supermarket? What does this future look like for people? And as you can see, I'm not going to read all of these, but we talked about people becoming more isolated because the community interactions might disappear. We talked about the fact that people would need upskilling, they need digital skills to be able to engage with online delivery systems. And once we'd sort of populated this table, thinking about all of this, that the next stage is obviously to see if we can actually produce physical data layers for this. So next slide, please. So here what I've done is I've taken some of those sentences which talk about what this future might look like, and I've highlighted ones which I think we could actually show as a spatial data layer at the neighbourhood level. So for example, costs, we need to know some kind of information on levels of income. We can take the income domain from the indices of multiple deprivation. Thinking about whether people have access to the internet. We can use the survey from the Living Costs and Food as to whether people are actually, paying for internet, and we can look at the characteristics of the type of people who have access to internet. Again, supermarket access, social isolation, occupation is another interesting thing. And we didn't just want to look at whether people have access to something. We also wanted some kind of level of actual engagement. We might find that maybe there's a household where they have internet access, but perhaps they're not really using it to the greatest capability. So we tried to determine a difference between access and actual use, and found that a good proxy for using the internet is people who actually participated in filling in the UK census online. Next slide, please. So now let's actually have a look at what this might look like. And what I'm going to present to you now is 3 use cases that you could use the tool for. So first of all, understanding the current situation. On the left-hand side, you can see a map of home energy emissions. So these are the emissions associated with heating your home. And on the right-hand side, so this is Greater Manchester, you can also see the percentage of homes which are at EPC D level and below. And there's a clear pattern between low emissions and having fewer homes which are energy inefficient. So people can start to tell a story about why we see high carbon emissions in certain places. And we would argue that part of being ready for net zero would be already starting to live a low carbon lifestyle. Next slide, please. The next thing we thought about doing was using the tool to determine where a policy might work. So I'm going to talk you through our thinking about who could self-fund retrofit. So we thought the best places for trying to sort of start up an information campaign about retrofitting your home, you might want to target areas where that home energy footprint is high. So we saw that map of energy emissions earlier. In terms of self-funding retrofit, you probably need to be above a certain income threshold to be able to afford to make changes to your home. You also need to be allowed to make changes to your home. So you would probably want to target homeowners rather than renters for this particular policy. We want an open, to be pushing on an open door here. So maybe the places you would target first might be those where they are already interested in sort of green energy. And then we've got the sort of physical characteristics of the home. We'd be better off working with homes that are inefficient. And also a lot of the sort of fabric retrofit requires a whole house rather than a flat, particularly if you're wanting to do something to the roof. So you can imagine a situation where you collect all of this data, you make sure the polarity is the right way round, and then you could add these data layers up, and the area that scores highest under all 6 of these layers might be an area that you think has the greatest potential for this policy. So let's have a look at what that looks like. Next slide, please. So here are those maps representing all of those different characteristics. And I'm just going to ask you to go to the next slide, please, and we'll see what happens when you add all of those maps together. This is our map that shows the greatest potential for self-funded retrofit in Greater Manchester. And you can see we have highlighted areas in Salford and Oldham that we think, according to our criteria, have the greatest potential for this. So we would imagine the user clicking on the tool, saying, I'd like to build a data layer of my own. These are the particular characteristics that I'm interested in, adding them together, and then it gives them this heat map of where they might want to act. Next slide, please. Finally, we think the tool could be used to do some place matching. So again, our map on the left-hand side shows the areas of Greater Manchester with the greatest potential for self-funded retrofit. Are they similar to places in Leeds that we've also identified could work for self-funded retrofit? Is there any similarity between that area of Oldham and some of the areas towards the north of the city of Leeds, particularly areas like Roundhay? You could imagine doing all sorts of interesting typologies to try and work out areas that have similarities, and saying if a policy works well here in this area, it's likely to work in this sort of sister neighbourhood that sounds very similar in a different part of the country. Next slide, please. So as I said, we presented these ideas to user groups such as yourself and asked them what they thought. So the first thing we asked was what kind of features are actually important to you. We were really interested in whether people wanted the capability of putting their own data into the tool, because that would require a certain spec in terms of talking to our web developer. And actually, that seemed to be less of a consideration. People were much more positive and interested in the mapping functionality. They wanted the data to be based on trusted open source data. Next slide, please. We asked them whether they thought what we were showing them looked useful, and overwhelmingly people thought that this tool addressed an information gap. They said they would be likely to use it or recommend it to someone else, and they thought that the presentation looked user-friendly. So we were very happy about that. Next slide, please. We then asked people to write in text on a questionnaire what they thought the most useful elements of this tool were. And this idea of being able to overlay data to generate new information was overwhelmingly the thing that people liked the most. I think other comments talked about often people were having to go to different places to find data sets on different things, and having everything in one place was definitely seen as an advantage. The granularity was important. People thought the ability to be able to maybe download maps when they didn't have mapping software themselves, people liked that a lot as well. So overwhelmingly, people were very, very keen on what we had to say. Next slide, please. But we also asked people to comment on anything that we might not have thought about. And here there are some considerations that we really wanted to think some more about. So even when you're using neighbourhood data, we're talking with averages, which might hide the sort of ranges that are really going on in an area. Excuse me. So perhaps thinking about maxes and minimums within an area, or talking about the range might be something that we should be considering. We also need to work more on contextualizing the data, what to do about it. So providing some guidance as to how this data can be used with net zero policy is something we're also working on. There were some concerns about how the data could be used. If we're just showing areas where it's easy to do policy, that's really not useful. So we are going to go away and think very clearly about how we can work with people to make recommendations for where to act. And we also need to think about ethics. We want this to be a tool that the places we're talking about are happy with the data that we're presenting on them. Okay, so we don't want to be just making data about people. We want to be making the data with people. And we are going to be developing a set of sort of ground truthing exercises where we talk to people about what the data looks like for their particular neighbourhood and whether they feel this is an accurate representation of who they are. So next slide, please. So thinking about the impact we're going to have, we're producing this tool that will help users to understand the challenges and opportunities that places are going to face in the context of justice and climate. This tool is a learning opportunity. I think we want to make sort of YouTube videos that will help people to not only learn about how to use the tool, but also then what to do with the information once they've generated it. And we really hope that this will help to identify places that need additional support to engage in this agenda, and also to identify the support that's needed. Final slide, please. So when is this going to happen? I'm hoping you're all very excited about having a tool available. So in the spring, we're going to be looking at ground truthing the data sets with community groups and potential users around our sites in the north. Towards the end of spring, there will be an initial version where we will be testing the functionality. So we're going to get people to have a click, have a play around with the tool and see if they can answer the type of questions that they were hoping to with the tool itself. And with a launch of hopefully a finished version in the summer of next year.
That's great. Thanks, Samantha. Thank you, Anne, and thank you, Emily, for a really fascinating webinar. As we said at the beginning, this tool is being developed. It's built on a tremendous amount of work going back probably 5 years, but it's going to be continued to be developed over the next 5 as the Just Centre continues its work. So please do check in with us, get in touch with sending an email. We will be posting this webinar on our YouTube channel, probably in the new year, and giving people who haven't been able to attend today a chance to learn about our tool. Thanks very much, and have a lovely afternoon and holiday period.
Thank you.